Three. All right, Miss Krystal Allen, how are you today?
Doing pretty well. It's a rainy day here in New Orleans.
Really? It's too bad. It's actually like pretty. It's like a nice fall day in Carolina, so we'll take that for once. What's happening in New Orleans? How are things going down there?
You know what? Things are going pretty well. We are on the brink, though, of another potential storm. So Zeta, we're
Yeah.
watching. We've been spared for the last 2 to 3 hurricanes, thankfully. So just kind of awaiting landfall around Wednesday. Well, tomorrow afternoon.
Well, hopefully it obviously passes and nothing too bad. I saw that, but then also ice storm in Oklahoma or Nebraska somewhere. So like the balance of having a potential tropical storm there, but a winter storm in the southern Midwest. Strange times, nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Global warming conversations probably for another podcast. But nonetheless, we appreciate you joining. Definitely, I think excited. Well, no, I'm excited. And I think one, we've been stalking you on social media for a long time and love the work you all are doing. But also, like, you're the first consultant, but also like consulting firm that we've had join us as well to share more about that. So I think excited to hear more about your vision from the work, from your lens at the same time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so want to dive in. Obviously, all of the guests we have are famous on the Square Pizza Pod, and so you are the next famous person.
Which is why I was like, why did you choose me?
Never that. We were grateful you said yes.
You're like pretty big people.
But tell the people about this Time magazine feature and how you got to be famous in Time magazine.
So there is an incredible writer by the name of Erica Washington, who's a young African-American woman, and she was writing and based in Texas, but has since relocated to, I think, the DMV area, actually. And
tell people what that is, for those that don't know.
Oh, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Yep. And she was writing a piece about racial bias within K-12 school settings. Yep. And so as she, began to write the piece, she put out fillers to varying people that she knew. And I was recommended to her by someone she essentially knew, because she wanted to really speak with practitioners about what they had seen or directly experienced as relates to the topic. And I was grateful for the opportunity to talk to her about my, lived experiences as a Black student in a, traditional public school context, who also came from a low-income community. But then also to speak around my experiences as a teacher, assistant principal, and principal within public education as a Black woman as well, and things that I've seen, and then the consultant lens of being in lots of different schools.
And you went to school in Alabama, right? Different than Louisiana, obviously.
Yeah. So I went I went through 2 different school systems in the state of Alabama. One was within the city of Selma, because that's when I was born and was raised, and that was a county public school system. And then my latter years of high school, I actually attended a residential college preparatory boarding high school called the Alabama School for Mathematics and Science. There's a consortium of those schools in North Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. It's like a southeastern consortium of schools that are in partnership with universities. And so my instructors in high school were all professors. You had to have at least a PhD and 3 to 5 years of teaching experience to teach at that high school. And we lived on campus, dorms and all. So, long story short, those experiences in a quasi-urban space, but definitely a rural space, and then combined with being in a more metropolitan or full urban space of New Orleans, really influenced what, responses I gave her for that interview that she went on to write about within Time Magazine.
And can people still pick up the piece somewhere or find it if they want to go support?
Absolutely. They can find it on the shelves. Barnes & Noble's, Walmart, Winn-Dixie, and places. It's actually a limited edition. So they extended the time of it being on shelves until November the 20th. Nice.
So it's recent. That's great. Yeah, we can. We'll try to link it or figure out something in the show notes so when people check it out, they can see it. So one, that's awesome. Two, as you know, we're going to go wildly off track. So this is the first part in which we go off track of the podcast. But tell the people more about the boarding school and maybe in context of you growing up and then, moving to a boarding school, but then also context of your lived experience as a teacher and principal, I think in presumably non-boarding school environment, which I think you said. So maybe talk to us about the juxtaposition of those things.
Yeah. So, I attended a school district that was predominantly Black in terms of students. The high percentage, majority of students within the system coming from very impoverished backgrounds below the poverty line. So nearly all free lunch, not even reduced. And a lot of rural poverty at that. We had a lot below the poverty line. We had a lot of issues in terms of, teacher quality, really a lack of physical resources that were equitable, and just a lot of challenges culturally as well as academically. Things were just very under-resourced. And so in the midst of that, I will say I had several very hardworking teachers who they loved the craft and their profession, and they saw within myself something that I didn't even see within myself. This
is pre-boarding school.
The boarding school came after.
Before you went. Yep.
Yeah, so essentially I had a couple of teachers pool money together to purchase my way into a STEM summer camp that would be held 3 hours away from the city of Selma within Mobile, Alabama, at what would then later on become the high school that I would attend. And so they paid my way to stay there for an entire week. And that week changed my life in so many different ways. We had the opportunity to, this is in the 7th grade, we had the opportunity to capture squid, on the Gulf of Mexico, bring it back to the lab, dissect it. We were learning about politics. There's just so much.
I still don't want to catch squid, but I'm glad you do that. That sounds scary.
It was an amazing experience because it was such rigorous and fascinating topics and things that we engage in, but also it was racially diverse. Alabama is a very segregated state. It's not the only one for sure, but it was the first time I had ever gone to school with students who were Pakistani, that were Hispanic, that were white, that were Asian American, et cetera. And I fell in love with the experience. And I also, at a very young age, because I've always been very racially conscious, before I had the language to understand what diversity, equity, inclusion, were, I came back with gratitude, but also with a sense of righteous anger that it had to take me going that far away from home to get that type of experience. Because I felt like we all should just have this, but that wasn't my everyday experience. And so I recognized that I wanted to be back in that place. And so it's actually also a selective admissions high school, even though it's a public school. So you have to apply. I had to have at least a 20 on the ACT entering the 9th grade.
Entering the 9th grade?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I took the ACT twice and didn't get a 20. in the 12th grade. If that's like
I had to,
context for.
Yeah.
So well done. Well done.
Yeah. You have to interview with a panel of 6 judges or a selection committee. You had to state the case of why you wanted to go. You had to do essays, references, the ACT score, transcript, the whole 9. And essentially their idea, the legislature in Alabama opened the school in 1999 as a way to attract what was considered to be Alabama's best and brightest, to have them stay in the state to address danger. So they partnered with the University of Alabama in Auburn, so that when you graduate from this high school, you can start at either university as a junior instead of as a freshman, because of the collegiate coursework that you're actually taking there. What'd you say?
Hey, that's incredible. It's great.
Yeah, it was very impressive. And so I will say that, you know, I left that camp and I said, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get into this school. So I went to the local high school and I like checked out old ACT prep books and I prepped myself for 2 years. And I took the ACT essentially the summer. So the first time I took the ACT, I had just completed the 8th grade. It was before 9th grade started. I took it and I got a 21 on my first try. And so that was good enough. I knew to like hold the score for me to get in. And I applied and interviewed, got in, and being there was absolutely incredible. You know, like I learned so much. I grew tremendously, but I needed both experiences to understand and build a vision for what was possible within education and what every child needs to have a right to. It was literally 2 sides of a track. And then I knew what it was like to be without and to not have those things. You know, my 6th grade year of being in school, 2 of my classmates were pregnant. And that idea of, and then just my 9th grade year, you know, and granted, there are so many beautiful, amazing things about the district that I came from and the city that I'm from, and yet it's juxtaposition to unique challenges. I remember being in the 9th grade on the bus, and there's a girl with a razor underneath her tongue, and she literally sliced someone. Like, and I saw it, and that form of trauma, you know, was something that I never forgot. And the interesting experiences that I have are the things that I take with me every single where, because I know what it's like to be in prestigious educational institutions. I went to Notre Dame for undergrad. I'm finishing my doctorate right now at Columbia. And I also know what it's like to live in poverty. I go home to Alabama and my family lives in a variety of different living situations, from trailers and mobile homes to everything. I've grown up on food stamps, all those things. So I credit those things to also be a blessing to me, because people can't always walk in both types of rooms. And I feel comfortable wherever I am. And I think that was something that made me a good teacher and principal too, because I could meet anybody where they were and make them feel like a king or a queen, like helping them ensure they were treated with the respect and the dignity they deserved, and they weren't looked down on.
Wow. I mean, so much to follow up there. That's incredible. I mean, I love the phrase righteous anger. So if you haven't copyrighted that, definitely do that, or somebody else / our team is about to. So I want to pick up there. Also, like, speaking to like your teachers, right? I think even now, looking into what's happening with COVID and so many teachers sacrificing and or being on the front lines, but even pre-COVID, how much teachers sacrifice to purchase supplies, copy paper, markers, any of the above. But to your point, how incredible it was for your teachers, from your experience, to pool money, which was likely in Alabama or in any other state. We know teachers are underpaid. So for them to come together, pool money to support you to go to that opportunity, then for that opportunity to project so much now from what you're doing is just incredible for so many reasons.
Yeah. And, you know, my parents and family always value education and did the best with what they had. You know, and that's something I think is so important too, in terms of the empathy and understanding how to meet families where they are, and not perpetuating any type of like negative racial socialization and implicit bias that parents of color or parents in poverty don't care about education,
Right.
you know? Because there's so many stereotypes that are perpetuated that don't speak to the structural oppression that people have faced, and therefore how it's impacted their lived experiences and their inability to have access, for instance, to generational wealth.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that. And I think so much, unfortunately, like for whatever reason, stereotypes perpetuate, but they're very rarely / ever true, right? And they're often perpetuated from people that are creating stereotypes or oppressing others. So I think
Right.
there's that, but I think related to also your point around like, not everyone has access to a diverse school, a diverse neighborhood, and high performing or low performing. But to your point, when you and other humans and all humans often have access to diversity in all ways, maybe we can say they become better humans, or at least more empathetic to what others go through when they are progressing through life, and having that access to that is so important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it just so happened to be the case, for lots of structural and historical reasons that my, district fit the demographics it did.
Yeah.
And yet there are definitely, there are schools that are predominantly Black and they're very high performing. There are schools that are not racially diverse, and students definitely have inclusive, like good learning environments too. But I do think that what you just said is powerful, because I think that even when we have the conversation as educators, like policymakers, practitioners, et cetera, researchers, about diversity, we're often talking about it in terms of how Black children or brown children surrounded by other ethnicities are somehow helped.
Yep.
In a deeper way than we are having the conversations about all white schools.
Yep.
And the need for white children to be in racially diverse environments so that they will grow up knowing that the refrigerator they open every day is a Black invention, and the traffic light, all these things. And so interestingly, we don't frame it as that. We frame diversity as an advantage for Black and brown children, but not as an advantage and a need for white students as well.
And that's, probably unfortunately just coming from the systemic of white supremacy in the country, or just those that have written history and or written current policy, which is why that's often narrated in that way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that it's so easy to be socialized to think that,
right,
that if you believe that whiteness as a construct is the bar, then you, as a person of color or communities of color, your proximity to it is understood to be a symbol of success.
Mm-hmm.
And, therefore, this idea of Blackness or other things seen in a very deficit-based way, definitely connected to scientific racism and a whole lot of other stuff. But because we socialize it to be that, we then don't necessarily have any type of idea floating in the atmosphere at any given time that white people's proximity to something that is Black or brown is good for them.
Yep.
Helpful for them. We actually think the opposite. That's why we have white flight in terms of housing.
Yeah.
Because like Black folks are moving in the neighborhood.
Right.
We should leave, or that. So it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Like the school is getting more Black and brown.
Right.
So it's time to take our kids out.
Yeah. No, I think, so context, you didn't ask, but I'll tell you, hopefully it's cool. I majored in urban planning, and then,
okay.
but didn't know, like wasn't planning on it because barely got into college, but that's a podcast for another day. But when I was taking like urban planning 101, and they actually walk you through how, redlining in neighborhoods and districts, and then property values and loans and the lack of access to loans for the Black and brown population for a long time and still today. But then also like, the zoning districts, but also how schools are funded.
Yes.
And you're looking around and I'm like, this shit seems illegal. Like, I know you as a professor are telling me this, but like, why are, my naive self as an 18-year-old freshman doing urban planning 101, I was like, this shit seems really illegal and racist. How is this still happening in America? Which is then how I think like many of us became interested in urban education, or just from our own experiences, and like Teach for America, which have that shared experience. But that was very much like a light bulb moment for me, sitting in that class, thinking like, how is this perpetuated? How is this allowed while like the rest of this country is still trying to move forward, knowing like these like quote unquote policies are legal, but yet racist and oppressive at the same time.
Right. That's so real.
And I think because of that, right, like there's a lack of diverse neighborhoods, which we know, lack of diverse schools, lack of equitable funding of schools, which we're talking about. But I think bias in the sense that I think everybody should need to take like an urban planning 101 course, or somehow just like understand that like things didn't just like happen like this randomly. There's like a very true system in place that has been in place for a long time, which is why a lot of these things we're talking about are so true.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, a bit long-winded, but nonetheless, want to get to New Orleans and then some of the stuff you're doing. But just another quick connection for the audience is like you just got accepted with a number of really other great people into like this 4.0 Angel Syndicate, which is great. I spent 1 weekend in New Orleans, like a quick startup at 4.0, which is awesome, but want to give a shout out to Tiara in Charlotte and Jason Terrell, which don't know if you met them yet, but if not, they're great. They're dope. You're going to love meeting them, and can't wait to kind of hear about your guys' experience with that program at 4.0.
Yeah, Tiara and I are definitely connected.
Great,
but I haven't met Jason before. Tiara and I were actually on an Instagram Live together a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. Yeah, and we're going to be partnering with, our firm is going to be partnering with her for some services, that she provides in terms of translation. And so I'm really excited about it. But the 4.0 Angel Syndicate program is a really incredible opportunity to really focus on equipping Black leaders in the education space with the tools necessary to be strategic philanthropists. A lot of people within it are already, engaging in philanthropic giving, but it's, to make sure, like I said, it's more strategic, it's more intentional, and there's maximal impact. Return on investment to where those funds are actually going. And so a lot of, collective organizing in a way.
Yeah, I think the world of 4.0 and excited about like the new initiative and just to hear kind of how it's going and learn from afar. I think like asking you to speculate too, but I think it's also relevant is like, I've kind of been like weirdly jealous of New Orleans for a while, like the education scene, I think because like, it just seems to kind of breed incubation and innovation. And I want you to confirm or deny this, right? But you have like Camelback, you have like Kickboard that we used for a long time in Nashville. You have your organization, you have 4.0 schools. There's a number of other ones I'm missing. But like, is it, I guess in your lived experience, is it the policy? I know Katrina was a big effect in that. But how has New Orleans kind of come to be, if it is good in terms of like a ed incubation space? Like, is that even fair to say from an outsider?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is very mixed in terms of the power and the promise of it. I think that on the one hand, there is some really amazing work that's happening that is to be applauded, right? Like the work with Camp, for instance, the work with, Hassan. But at the same time, there's a lot of reconciliation that still actually needs to take place quite often between the Native, the Black and Brown Native New Orleanian community and the education reformers and education leaders and education innovators, because quite often these like programs are not necessarily accepting Native New Orleanian applicants, being intentional about centering the voices of the community. But a lot of the programming is to serve Native New Orleans, and
bringing change to them rather than like maybe co-creating change with them and valuing their experience.
And so I think and that's not to say that like 4.0 and Camelback don't do that, because I think
Right.
they model it in particular well, but there's so many more programs that are actually not community centered that when you think about where the dollars are funneling in from and who they're going to, they're not necessarily being actually invested in the community.
Right.
You know, and depending on what the ideas are, you know, there's a lot of inequity in the fact that those funds are often given to white founders who are also not native to the city.
Right.
And it's almost, and we've had some ventures like absolutely fail.
Yeah.
Not do well at all and not do right also by children.
Yep.
And in those instances, you know, there's an opportunity to almost like tuck your tail and like just move to another city and like restart and rebrand at the expense of harming communities or like experimenting people that wouldn't necessarily happen in another community context. You know, so I think that there's a way for innovation to be inclusive and to be more equitable. And I think that we actually have mixed examples here of equitable and inclusive innovation, and many also examples of it not being that way.
That's really good context. So it sounds like not even a best practice, but just a requirement from your lens and from what you're seeing in New Orleans is co-creating and or just not delivering programs outside of those lived experiences and those you're seeking to serve in any given community. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, you know, when we also look at COVID funding distribution, the first like set of business loans in terms of like national numbers and data, 93% of Black business applicants were actually denied and rejected. That number is close to 89 to 90% for Hispanic business owners. So we talk about later years from now when we read about wealth generation,
response to COVID,
and things that aid it, you can't ignore stuff like that. And so when you think about that on the education innovation side, you have folks, let's say they're not even native New Orleans. They might be Black like me, and I'm from Selma. The idea that Black and brown folks in general, but also people from New Orleans, are sitting on ideas and ventures and all this work, and they're like literally doing lots of work, especially on the nonprofit side, but their ventures and their work is not funded by the different foundations and by the different sources of grants and everything else. I think it's just very telling because there are many more organizations who will write equity this and that all day in their grant applications and grant deliverables, but are not delivering on that.
And the importance of holding that accountable, but also maybe like, and I think this speaks a little bit to your work, but if not, tell us, but also just like help us connect the dots and understand like how these lived experiences in New Orleans and also as yourself led to like the incredible work you guys are doing as an organization, I think locally across the country and internationally, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my personal lived, experiences and those of the folks who work, on our team is really the basis by which we craft all of our learning experiences and all of our support. So we are a global education and management consulting firm, which means that we service schools that are K-12, early childhood, also higher education. But on the management side, we focus on leadership capacity building for nonprofits and for business. And so the work that we do is provision of professional development services, from trainings to coaching to strategic planning and even design of frameworks and curriculum. And that is work that we do here in the U.S. and in 4 countries abroad.
Fifth one coming soon.
It's so funny. India, South Korea, Nigeria, and South Africa. And
wow, incredible.
Yeah. And the work abroad is mostly individual executive coaching, but then it's also workshops for teachers. And so we're planning right now our next international PD for actually about 200 teachers in Nigeria, and then January 1 for about 75 teachers in India.
So Greg, I mean, I'd love for you to share like how your teaching, admin, principal experience led to the jump in this. And I think like us selfishly is like from my own experience was like we had hired, outside firms and other previous organizations / schools I worked in, like nice people told us what to do, but didn't really actually help us get anything done, and felt like the gap. All right, good. So we're there. So the gap between implementation to me was crazy, particularly when we're talking about organizations with limited resources, organizations focused on kids and families and under-resourced communities and those that have been oppressed or marginalized for so long that like we didn't need pro bono work, and we also didn't need like nice glossy pamphlets. We needed, frankly, things and systems and tools to get things done to support them, but also to support the schools we were running. So that was very much us. So we very much we're trying to be like the anti-consultant, because like the definition of consulting is giving advice. We didn't need more people to give us advice. We need people to help us get shit done. That was good.
Yeah, implementation. Yep. Well, I would say this.
Yeah, I would love to just hear like how you got there. And also, we get that question too. And also, I don't know about you, but sometimes consulting can be a 4-letter word in like our maybe education space, which we try to stay away from. But nonetheless, I want to hear like if any of that resonates with you.
Yeah. So, I should have said this before with your last question, but our team is predominantly Black and brown. So we are Middle Eastern, Asian American, Black, and Hispanic. We all have education experience in public ed and also in independent schools. And the majority of us actually are first-generation college graduates. We have worked in lots of contexts and been a part of lots of organizations where we've seen really good best practices, and we've seen things be a hot mess, and one thing that's very important to me as a founder is our core value of authenticity, that what we do needs to be very authentic, it needs to be relevant, it needs to be genuinely helpful for people and not a waste of their time. And I think when you've gone through certain experiences, it makes you very hyper aware of not putting anyone else through that. And so that is the forefront my mind. Like for me, becoming a principal was more about, I want to never forget what it's like to be a teacher. Like never forget, like legitimately think, like, is what you're about to send out necessary? How does it make you feel? Does it stress them out? Like all of that, because so many people ascend to roles and they forget where they came from, or they forget what it's like. And so on the consultant side, I like us to be very grounded in like, what does this mean for people? Is it actually helpful? Is it useful? But then also, that's why we don't do much work that's a one and done. We build relationships with people. The question is, how long are we going to work together? It's not, can we do this workshop? It is like the workshop is the entry point, and then we're back online 2 weeks from now, or 30 days, or it's a 6-month experience, or a year, or 2 years. And I think that is so important, because you're able to take people through awareness building, analyzing their practices, supporting them in the implementation of the work or the action they're taking, and helping them figure out means of accountability so that it can be, sustained. So that's definitely one piece. And
I can imagine too, just to build off that, like the focus on the implementation and the empathy to make sure they have a good experience, but it's also good for those they're serving, has to be the best marketing experience or just like support system you guys offer, because they have to feel that authenticity that you guys are living in.
Yeah. And then it's all, it's all customized. Like I don't really believe in plug and play. I never have, even as a teacher or a principal. And so, it may take time. Right. But like nobody's getting a session that somebody else got for real. Like there might be some components that are similar, or like that slide might be the same, but there's studying that happens to say, what is happening in Detroit
Yep.
And how do we make this session relevant to this set of Detroit educators, because they are not rural Arkansas.
Yep.
You know, and so I think meeting people where they are is so important. I think to your question around like, how did the work start? So I never planned to be a consultant. I'm a person of faith. And I say that like, this was just in God's plans for me as a means to expand my impact and to also build a bit of freedom. And that freedom is not just financial freedom, but it's like freedom and autonomy of my time. You know, freedom to be able to create a reality where I'm not asking people for permission to do things.
Don't tell people entrepreneurs have a lot of free time, because unless I'm doing it wrong, I have less free time now than what I've ever had. So don't start that theory. Don't start that theory.
Yes, he is absolutely right, y'all. Definitely the hours are bananas. But I think what I mean by is that I try to you know, it's a lot of work, but I try to make choices to not spend
you have the freedom
time
to choose how you spend. That's right.
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? That service, that's not what we do. I don't like it. You don't like it. We don't like it. So why would we ever offer it to people, right? And I think in prior roles, I had to do everything because it's like, that's your job and that's how you're going to get paid. And so I think there's a little bit more autonomy, you know, and being able to do this, but also I actually, interestingly enough, worked, you know, in the K-8 space, never at the high school level, but in the K-8 space as a traditional public school teacher, and then moved to the charter world, which was really cool to be able to have experience in both realms.
Yeah, I love that. I share that too. And I think arms me to your point with just diversity of experience that sometimes is good and sometimes people think it's bad, but you always have talking points.
You do. You really do, right? And so the other piece for me, though, is that like there are pros and cons to every type of school and every system. I tell folks, like, there's not a silver bullet. I don't believe in that. But I do think that there are attributes of really highly effective systems or schools in general, no matter what type they are. One of the, you know, the pitfalls, though, I would say, of the urban charter school space here in our city is that everything is without collective bargaining and collective protection for employees. And that particularly happened post-Katrina. So we don't necessarily have unions that our educators are a part of. And within it, on the employment side, there's no due process for anything. So everything is 100% at will based on fit, and which we know that can have a lot of racial implications in terms of how we define that and what that looks like. So, you know, in my last year of principalship, which was 2016, at that moment in time in my career, I actually have been leading a lot of social justice work. Like being documented. I was featured and shadowed by Yahoo News for a year, the Hechinger Report, a couple of different things. And it was for leading turnaround work in what was a failing school. The practices, though, I will say, the practices in my leadership in so many ways were things that made folks uncomfortable. But it's the stuff that today is praised. Because it's culturally responsive. It is culturally
folks, like frame that up, like
folks as in
families, students, board members, all the above. Like what are
charter management executives, like chief executive officer, chief academic officer, et cetera. And you know, at the time in which is very recent for sure, but at the time in which I was a school leader, our school leadership landscape, in contrast to pre-Katrina, was actually predominantly white, to a system of over 90% Black and brown kids. Not because there was a lack of Black and brown school leaders to be in positions at all, but just for a lot of structural reasons, for folks not necessarily being provided the same opportunities, a callback, like all the different things. So, you know, I am very hyper aware of then what it means to be a Black leader in a system that is predominantly white at a time in which race isn't a thing that people talk about.
Right.
And I did quite the opposite. Talk about it a lot. Talk about it with the kids. When Mike Brown, when that incident happened, raised over $13,000, took our kids to Ferguson, Missouri. They interviewed community leaders. They met with his parents. They talked about for them what it meant to be Black in America. These are 3rd to 5th graders. They went to Selma. They met John Lewis, like a lot of organizing work that I also got written up for at that time.
Wow.
And ultimately was let go because the way I led and the way I showed up was not the right fit for the space or the network. Fast forward later, a couple of months from then, I actually started my consulting agency, more so because my grandmother said, Krystal, I don't want you to take another principalship. I want you to think about how much time you have spent doing that job, how much you poured into it. And I feel like, yes, you might still stay in education, but there may be something else within education that you should be doing that gives you more freedom. And it's funny because she literally said the word freedom. She's like, you've gone through a lot. And really what she was saying is that the thing that happened to me was traumatic, and it was. I've never been let go of a job in my life, let alone for what?
When you were like dominating and doing so well in.
Yeah, and so the irony, is that again, the very thing.
Advice.
Yeah, I agree. And so that felt like a mini sabbatical, and what was birthed from. Well, in the in between time of me telling people like, no, I'm not gonna apply for this principalship position. The compromise will be, well, can you come and train my teachers on this, or can you do this and that? So I would begin to do these workshops and coach folks. And my mentor told me one day, hey, that's consulting. You could actually do that all the time. I'm like, what do you mean you do it all the time?
People pay you for this, yeah.
And that's literally how it was birthed. And so, I share that story just to say that sometimes out of very challenging experiences, there are some very beautiful outcomes. And what I couldn't see at the time that was very hard and very traumatic was an experience of push out based on a lot of institutional stuff, but I also am so thankful that it happened and that I experienced everything that I have, because fast forward, it's the very stuff, the case studies, it's the stuff that I use to literally advise people, not only, nationally, but internationally, on what it means to create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable space, particularly within education.
Right.
And there's some stuff that an article and literature and those resources just can't give. Not to say we don't give those things. We give lots of concrete resources. But the lived experience of saying, I know how you feel.
That's right.
I know exactly what that feels like. And let me tell you how it shows up by well-meaning people.
Yep. I mean, so much to build off there. I think just like the lived experience, but also the empathy from that lived experience as a student, but then also as a professional, knowing that you were on the right path and doing so well for those you were serving, and that so many others could learn from you in that way, I think is remarkable, and probably deserves a second episode, as we're almost already at time and want to respect your time already. But let's get to a few more maybe just pieces of info you can share with people. So 30 seconds or less, whether it's your work or somebody else's, what do you think is the most innovative thing in education you're seeing?
The most innovative thing in education, I would say, is not even innovative. It's actually centering the voices and the input of our kids and our families, literally having them at the table with you as you make budget decisions.
That's right.
Putting our children on the board, opening spaces for boards, for parent seats, board, finding unique ways to center the folks that you are seeking to serve.
Amen on all of that. And this might have already answered the next question, but I'm going to ask you either way. What's one actionable thing people should do to then improve education?
Ooh, examine themselves. And examine themselves you can use a variety of tools. You can use Tima Okune's Traits of White Supremacy Culture. Yep. You can read Ibram Kennedy's Stamp for the Beginning. Yep. You can read White Fragility. Like, there's so many different things, and there are lots of equity audits. But like, I actually think a lot of people are doing performative work, trying to make structural changes, and haven't done the interpersonal like work, which will then just still perpetuate.
That's the hard work, right? That's because that gets vulnerable and messy and stuff more so than.
And it's both and. It's not either or. It's both and. But I think there are a lot of people who are skipping the individual work, and I'm like, so we're not going to talk about what you just said as microaggression?
That's true. Yep.
But we want to make this post on Facebook.
Yes, to all that again. Yes. And as always, the most selfish and hopefully maybe fun question, but what does square pizza remind you of?
It reminds me of Fridays in the cafeteria.
Yes.
Like at school.
Yes.
I was so like, oh my gosh, this question is the best question ever.
All right, so
French fries.
Yes to all of that. I think the interest of this question, outside of the selfish title we have here, is that we found out that like square pizza is very much regional. And so I've told the story before in other episodes, but like Dr. Howard Fuller from Milwaukee was like, no idea what you're talking about, like kick rocks. Like he didn't find it funny. He had no idea what we were talking about. And then we had like, we had somebody like New Hampshire that had like square, like just big slices, but no square pizza. So it's been interesting. This is going to end up going into like a case study of like nutritional companies that are servicing schools and who does square pizza and who doesn't.
Is it mostly Southern?
I mean, I grew up in Ohio, in Toledo. We have square pizza. North Carolina does. Tennessee does, from my own experiences. Alabama does. Yep.
Georgia does.
So, we got to get more folks from the West Coast and do more, like build out our case study. But it's par for the course, right? But not the same lived experience for everybody, although a much lighter lived experience. But nonetheless, not everybody has had access to the beauty of square pizza.
You are a connoisseur of words, Greg. I'm so here for what you said.
Krystal, thanks so much for taking time and all your work. We're going to link all the stuff, all the stuff you do, so people can hit you up. But so grateful for you and your work, and just that you are taking time to share it with us and our audience today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the space and opportunity. And you all can find us on Instagram, K.Allen.consulting. We're on Facebook, K.Allen Consulting. So follow, like, support.
We're going to shout her out, but she's crushing the social media game. Thanks, Krystal.
All right. Thank you, Greg. You're awesome. All right. Bye-bye.